Right then, welcome back. Today, well, we're going to have a look at a base setup for Ride 5. Now, yes, I was very unkind about it when it first came out. Yes, I don't think it's as good as Ride 4. However, it's out, pay good money for it, and we need to do something about it. So we've got the 2021 KTM 890 Duke R. We're at Valencia on the national course, and we're going to set a base time using what I would call a zero setup. So everything is in the middle at 4, so I can go down to 0 or up to 8 on the suspension. Transmission, electronics, we're going to set them how I've been using them, so at least there is some continuity in what the bike is doing. We'll call it stock. There you go, all down the middle. Tyres wise, we'll stick softs on because I want to see if we can get any heat or colour into the tyre. Time compression's fixed, the conditions are static, so we should be able to just run some laps and see where we get. Now, my biggest gripe with the game, and this is not going to be a short video by the way, you're looking at least 30 odd minutes, so if you want the setup, just go to the last 2 minutes and have a look at it, because this is going to go on for quite a while. My biggest gripe with the game is the lack of feedback. There is no feedback. You get on the brakes, nothing, nada, zip. You just don't know anything what's happening. You just have to basically jam the brakes on at a braking zone and hope that the bike stops. It's not until you get onto the last 5% of the tyre that there appears to be something there. It is quite frustrating. It is quite annoying, especially if it's wet. There is zero notice that you're going to smash the front end into the floor. But on stock settings, we ended up doing a 116.210. First up, front end, preload, down to 0. This is what we'll do. We'll go through each setting in turn, we'll zero it, we'll max it, and then we'll decide on a setting somewhere in the middle if we need to, or whatever feels best. So on preload 0, my notes just say massive understeer. Yeah, that's basically just what it was. There's no, look at that, there's no support from the front end. It won't turn in and brake any energy into the corner whatsoever, and it just runs on. Notice the tyres not changing colour. Yeah, a little bit weird. The closest we got was about a second off the 116.2, so we moved it up to 8, all the way up to the top. And if you read the little blurb, it says raising the bike's centre of gravity makes it more responsive, as in it'll move faster from side to side, and that's basically just what the front preload does. It just makes the bike move quicker from side to side. Preload on 8, oh my lord, what a difference. Probably not quite as fast in the absolute middle of the corner. However, better on the way in, better on the way out. We were taking time out of the 116.2 on the stock settings pretty much everywhere. Yes, the 116.2 wasn't a perfect lap. I wasn't going for a perfect lap. I was just going for a base time that was representative of a stock setting on that motorbike, and we could just work our way around it. But we ended up taking about 4/10. We ended up on a 115.8. The biggest difference is the bike's turning much faster. I'm almost turning too early into the corners now, and we can change direction so much better. There's still issues, but we'll work through the setup and we'll try and eradicate them as we go. So 116.2 on stock to a 115.8. So what, 4/10 of a second, which is not too bad. Now, I didn't know how much time we were going to be able to find on the setup. I was just literally going step by step by step by step. Next up, spring hardness. Now, on 0, I just said understeer on corner exit. Riding the bike, doing 2, 3, 4 laps, trying to get a feel for what it wanted, working out where the braking points were, working with zero feedback from the controller, and then making notes on it was incredibly dull. It was also incredibly difficult, but anyway, 0 spring hardness, understeer. Just understeer absolutely everywhere. You can see I'm having to change gear at the last minute. I'm putting loads of rear brake on. So we sacked that off quite quick, and we went to spring hardness 8. Bear in mind, we did a 115.8 from 116.2, so that was 4/10 of a second. Moving the spring harness to 8, oh my good lord. 115.8 was the target, and we ended up sticking a 115.351 in. So just running full preload and full spring hardness is worth the best part of a second on a lap. Yes, we're now getting the problem of the rear end waving about in the breeze, but we're going to sort that out when we get to the arse end and we make some changes, and we will settle it down. But yeah, 115.351, which again wasn't too bad. And just for reference, that 115.351 would have put us, I think, either 4th or 5th on the leaderboard. But we're not done. Oil, the amount of oil. More oil equals a stiffer front suspension. It's still on the front end, obviously. So more oil equals stiffer front suspension because there's more liquid to move. And if you've got the compression or rebound dampers adjusted, it depends how large the hole is for the oil to flow through. However, what it does limit is weight transfer forward and back. So if you wanted a little bit more braking force, i.e. on, say, a wet track or something like that, then you would run less oil, from what I can work out about it. Zero oil, slight increase in braking distance, and it also increased understeer. So we stuck the oil up to 8. The bike was stiffer. So on zero oil, that's the minimum amount of oil. I think the in-game physics engine, the suspension was basically bottoming out. It was running on into corners, and it was understeering because there was nothing to push the front end back up. On 8, the bike was reacting quicker, but because it's now got more oil in it, I don't think it leans over quite as far, and I also don't think it gets into the flow of the travel quite as much, which means ultimately it's got less grip because it's forcing a little bit of weight rearwards. So it just doesn't, I say feel, subjectively, it just doesn't feel quite as nice on the edge of the tyre. So I said we'll set that to 4 as a compromise, because that just seems to be a nice place in the middle. Now again, you know what, these sound glitches on this Xbox are doing my absolute head in. I've reset the console so many times. Zero compression. I put possibly a little bit more lean angle. It seemed to engage the rear of the bike better. Slight increase in front tyre temp, which would make sense because we're reducing the amount of damping on the front end. So more weight transfer, but with more weight transfer, there's more weight on the front, which means more weight has to go back, which means it'll understeer. So we pumped it up to 8, and we managed to take another 0.3 of a second out onto a 115.076. We're getting there. We're slowly but surely working it out. Now, I said I didn't like it on 8 because the bike was nervous, so I knocked it back to 6. Again, it's just working out where the compromise is. Plus, if we were running at a track that was really twisting, we needed a bit more front end support, we'd have to be able to bump the compression up to slow the weight transfer forward and back. You get what I mean. So what was next? Rebound setting, 0. I put a slight increase in edge grip, but braking distance has increased. Again, if there's 0 rebound damping, that would make sense because the spring would return to its extended position much faster, because that's the way the rear shock on a bike works, and I'm hoping it works in the same way. If you have 0 rebound damping, you are not damping the effect of the spring rebounding, which means the oil pathway is wide open. So when you get on the brakes, rather than the rear of the bike just taking just a tiny fraction of a second to extend and give the front end a chance, what it's doing is extending really quickly, and that's pushing the front of the bike forward, which means you're getting that kind of increase in the braking distance and possibly understeer. Now, it wasn't actually too bad. We had a couple of invalid laps which possibly could have gone a bit quicker, but it didn't leave you any margin. As soon as you missed the braking marker by 1 metre or 2 metres, you were running on because there was no support from the back end. So we bumped it up to 8, and that I put increased the stability and braking performance but reduced mid-corner speed. I've set it to the same as the comp as a compromise. So basically we've gone 6 and 6 on the compression and the rebound damping on the front end. We didn't go any quicker, but I mean, you can see it's a bit more stable. it's just a bit better just as you go into the corner. And I have noticed as well doing this that you can either have it good on the way in and good on the way out, or good in the middle. You can't have all three. It just will not let you have that. Rear, back end, rear, preload. On 0, I said the rear feels loose and it starts to spin on exit. You can see that. As soon as I touch the brakes, the back end of this bike is having an absolute wave about in the wind. There you go, look. So if you were on something that was a bit stable and a bit, is it anodyne? Is that the word, anodyne? Something that just is a bit meh. So for example, a ZZR 1400 or a Hayabusa or something like that, that's a bit long in the wheelbase, drop the rear preload down and it'll make it a bit more mobile and hopefully get you to be able to turn it in a bit better on the brakes. I say it was okay, but I mean, look, it is very loose, very, very loose, and that made us run into the chicane a little bit deeper, and then we were wide on exit. I mean, we were there or thereabouts, weren't we, that 15-0. We weren't far off until we made a bit of a hash brown of that chicane. So we turned it all the way up to 8. And I said the rear is more stable, but it causes massive understeer. It's still waving about a little bit, just because if the preload's turned up, the spring's going to be a bit stiffer, which means the tyre's not going to bite into the tarmac quite as much. So again, it was just one of them weird situations where you moved it to 0 and it's waving about, you moved it to 8 and it's waving about. So can you guess what we did? Yeah, we said it's a half the front preload, and as a general rule of thumb, if you drop the front preload, drop the rear to match, because it will just make sure the bike and the way that it moves about and pivots forwards and backwards, it should keep it steady. I have tried this on several other bikes with quite consistent results, so bear with me just as we get to the end. I'm not just making this up to get a setup video out there. Well, we did the best part of 100 laps, I think, in the end, just to try and work out what we were doing. It's not translated massively well across to the sports bikes because there's a slight difference in weight bias and where that weight sits between the wheelbase, but I'm working on that at the minute, so just bear with me. That's why this is set up for naked bikes more than anything. We'll set that to 4 and we'll leave it. Rear spring hardness. Right. This was the single biggest gain of time in all of the setup. Best part of 0.6 of a second. Target is 115.056. Watch the way this bike turns in now. Look how much tyre it turns. Go on, get that right up here. Mystery as to why. I can't understand why running a softer rear spring would make that bike turn in much sharper than that. Maybe it's a combination of the preload, rebound, compression and spring hardness all working together. I don't think the physics engine is that complicated, but we can but guess, unless somebody from Milestone wants to leave a comment and tell me that I'm actually talking out my backside and it's the most complicated physics engine in the world. No, it's not. But yeah, much tighter turning, better on exit, change in direction much better, transfer of grip from the front axle to the rear axle. Now when you're turning in, rather than the back of the bike pushing, look at the difference through there. Oh, it's just delightful. And this basically was the sweet spot. This was the sweet spot now. Any other changes after this were purely for feel. This was as fast as this bike went around this track on a 114.475. So 0.6 of a second, give or take, a thousandth or so. Yes, much better. That's on 0 spring hardness. On 8 spring hardness, I put the bike is faster to react, but has massive understeer and more rear spin. Oh, just for reference, that 114.475 is top dog on the leaderboards as well, but we'll come to that at the end. Yeah, I put bike is faster to react, but massive understeer and more rear spin. It seemed to just initially turn in loads tighter, but then on the corner exit, because there's no rear weight transfer, which again makes sense, it's understeer on an exit, which means the rear spring's too hard, so instead of the weight moving backwards, the tyre's pushing it forward, and that's causing the front tyre to slide. Now, on the Brutale, that actually ended up cooking a front tyre. I know, it's never happened before, no matter what I've done on what bike or anything else, it just didn't happen. However, that scrap, so we set that to 0 and left it. 0 compression. on the rear. Bike is slow to react and has massive understeer on corner exit. Yeah, you're about to see that vividly. Chasing myself on a 114.4. As soon as I get on the gas with 0 compression damping, there you go, look. The bike just squatted because there's nothing to stop the bike compressing. The energy goes straight into the spring, and as soon as you let off the gas, because it's squatted so far, it just boings back up and you end up just understeering all over the place. Again, it makes sense. It is right in the way that the theory is and the way that that theory manifests itself in the game. So far, the physics engine, whilst there's not a lot of feel, it is actually not too bad. 8 compression. Better on corner entry, but worse mid-turn and on exit. Starting to push energy forwards, the front tyre's starting to get warm, which again would make sense because we're on 8 compression damping, the highest level of damping on the compression stroke of the shock. So rather than letting it compress at a reasonable speed, it's slowing it down, and that's pushing more energy back towards the front tyre, and that's why we're getting the understeer, that's why we're getting the heat in the tyre, that's why we're getting everything that we need. So far, as much as it pains me to say this, the physics engine makes more sense on this than it does on Ride 4. I'm not saying it's better, I'm just saying it makes more sense when you read... how do we stay on that? When we read through the blurb for each of the adjusters, and then you look at what the bike's actually doing and where the energy's going, it does make sense. It makes more sense than 4. 4's more usable, right? And I need to stop saying 4's X, Y, and Z, but hey ho, it is what it is. 0 Rebound, introduced some understeer is what I put. On the rear, I said it's 6. I set the compression to 6 as a compromise. Again, that just felt better. 4 is the fastest, 6 is the best feel. 0 Rebound on the rear, just massive understeer because the spring is springing into its unsprung position rather fast. Yeah, she sells seashells on the seashore and all that lot. 8 Rebound, I put better entry and mid-corner speed but worse on exit, match to rear compression. So what I'm suggesting is that whatever you set the rear compression at, match it with the Rebound, and then the spring, the rear end, should spring and damp and rebound in a way that is consistent for how you want it to. You can adjust that if you want it to squat more, it's a tighter track, and try and get the bike to turn a little bit more. You can open up the compression damping by reducing the number, so 0 is no damping, 8 is maximum. You can possibly induce a little bit of rear steer. It's not something that the game likes. From what I've seen so far, it's not something that you can induce overly easily, whether you've got a massive amount of power or not. The bikes just seem to want to understeer, and that seems to be quite a big safety blanket that they've engineered into the game. But yeah, the rear Rebound, I mean, we've done what, 69 laps, 69 to 71 at this point. You can just see, look, there's just a little bit of running wide on exit. There you go. And that's why I was quite surprised how well the Valencia track, the national layout, actually suited this kind of work. You've got a high-speed straight, a really fast left-hander at the end, and then everything else is quite technical. We set compression and return, the Rebound on the back end, to 6. Now, slipper clutches, swing arm length, and chain tension. Absolute mystery. Not something that I'd ever changed on any of the bikes that we're using, not something that I'd ever thought about before. It was just a case of, what are we doing, how do we make it better? Slipper clutch minus, as in 0, means the slipper clutch doesn't engage, and basically it's just like an open clutch where you go down the gears and the back torque from the engine over revving and the rear wheel trying to slow down puts torque on the plates, and the clutch plates open up. They don't mesh together, which means basically you don't get a lot of engine braking. You just get in the drag from the rear wheel and a bit of rear brake. No good. I put increases braking distance and understeer, which is consistent with what would happen if you ran a clutch in its open format. Slipper clutch on 8, as in it's not going to slip very much, it's going to lock a lot quicker. It's similar to engine braking. In fact, it's not similar to engine braking, it is engine braking. It's just not done electronically, it's done mechanically. That is basically what it is. It's like another layer of engine braking. So I put makes the rear unstable, would be good for bigger, heavier bikes, i.e. ZZR 1400s, higher boosters and stuff like that. Leave it on 4 for the lightweight stuff. Again, if you want to run full electronics and you feel that it's a little bit too aggressive, you could perhaps use the slipper clutch setting as an in-between. So run the slipper clutch on 2, but run the electronics on 4. So you'd have essentially 8 settings, and you could run a 6th setting almost. It makes sense to me, I just hope it comes across that way. Swing arm length, 0. Better mid-corner, but struggles with understeer and exit. Yeah, well, we can see that straight away. As soon as you get on the gas, you're making the bike shorter, which in theory would increase the spring rate because the pivot point is much closer to where you're trying to do the boinging, so it would be harder to compress the spring, which again, when you read the blurb, that makes sense. It's a tough one, and this is the problem with the slipper clutch, the swing arm length and the chain tension. What are you trying to achieve? How do you play the game? Where are you getting on the gas? How are you setting up the electronics? It's so subjective, so subjective. 8 on the swing arm length, as in moving the wheel as far back in the swing arm as we can. On the chain adjusters, understeer, baby. Absolute mad understeer. So if it's raining and you've got a bit of a nervous motorbike, make the swing arm a bit longer and you will possibly understeer into the scenery for most of the race. The bike's longer. Longer bikes are harder to turn. It's a well-known fact. As the length increases, the centre of gravity drops, the agility of the bike is reduced, and they become harder to turn. Again, an accurate reflection in the changes based on what the physics model said and what the real kind of life scenario would be. Chain tension. So swing arm length, I said set it to 2 as a bit of a compromise. I could be convinced to run it on 3 or 4, to be fair, and I would not begrudge or be upset if someone suggested that. Chain tension, 0, understeer from the mid-corner point onwards. Again, nothing to write home about. It just, there you go, you can see it as we're coming out that corner. Then we're going to have to nip the apex, which means we're slower. Then we have to get the brakes, and then it's going to understeer again. It's just, it's finding what works for you. This is not a band-aid or plaster or bandage for all of the handling problems in this game. What it is a base setup for the naked bikes that you can basically plumb in anything from a 765 Street Triple up to a Brutale 900RR, possibly even bigger because of the way that the nakeds are with the weight distribution, and you can tweak it to your heart's content. Tyre gets warm, increase your compression damping, alright? Tyre doesn't get warm, tyre gets cold, reduce your compression damping, reduce your spring hardness. You work out, you just need to adjust one thing at a time and have a little play with it. Chain tension on 8, bike feels twitchy and slow to turn, leave on 4. I mean, I could be absolutely 100% convinced to leave the chain tension on 4, the swing arm length on 4, and the slipper clutch on 4, and never really worry about them again, because the impact to how I want to ride the bike and what I want to do is absolutely minimal. So I just said, leave that on 4. And that's where you go. And I've zoomed in a little bit, but that is essentially the best setup for feel. That felt the nicest. It wasn't the quickest. It was not the quickest by about a second, but it felt the nicest. It behaved. It was consistent. We did a massive amount of laps. It was the best part of 100 laps in the end, and it just... it took me so long to try and work out what was going, and I didn't want to get annoyed and judge it, but anyway, that was the fastest. That was the best for feel. That is the fastest setup. So the magic number from the top is 88466 404444. There you go. So that's in exactly the same order as it is when you're adjusting the setups. The settings, gears, again, subjective. It depends on the track. We got best part of 250,000 credits and got KTM up to level 4 pretty quickly. However, the payoff was that 114.475 jammed us all the way up to the top on the leaderboards. Excuse me. Other bikes. Brutale. Oh, listen to that noise. Oh, what an absolute filthy bit of kit this was. So much faster in a straight line. Now, I was expecting it to walk all over the KTM. It accelerates faster, it's faster in a straight line, it feels a bit more sort of like keyed in on the way into the corner, but it must be a lot heavier because the KTM ran rings around it at the back end of the lap. I was hoping to get into the 13s or 113 with a little bit more mucking about with this KTM. I think I probably could, but look at the front tyre, we are cooking it straight away. Now, I haven't really done that on other bikes, not really bothered. Put the same settings in that we were using on the KTM, and we ended up putting quite a lot of energy into that front tyre. Flicking it from side to side on the gas again, the setup just seems to let you do that a little bit. The braking's still an absolute abomination of feel and physics and whatever else you want to call it. But outside of that, it wasn't too bad. How did I control that front tyre? Well, the first thing I did is I put the slipper clutch up a notch or two, I can't remember, probably just one. I went and tried it and mucked about with the gears. The gearing felt like either too short, too long, or somewhere in the middle. I tried it, went away, didn't really make much of a difference. It felt better, it was hanging on a bit better towards the end and the exit of the corner. The gearing was absolutely all over the place. I couldn't work out. Short is now right on this as well. Left is long, short is right, by the way. So then we went back in and I thought, well, if I'm cooking the tyre, why don't I up the compression? And that's what I did basically, and we ended up running a 114.676. The sound glitch was horrendous on that lap, but I just included a bit of footage just to say, well look, I did get the tyre temp on the Brutale under control, and it actually, if you watch it through the corner as well, it just seems a bit better behaved. See the Ghost running wide and deep, look how much nicer that. Actually, not the Ghost, actually we are. It's much better as you're coming out. Watch this, we'll run wide and foul the lap, but again, get on the gas a metre too early and it just runs wide, and then I'm panicking and I'm trying to force it. It didn't work. Just to keep it above board and legal, I then ran Kawasaki Z900, not sure what vintage, 2020, 2021, something like that. It's got a digital dash, so it's a fairly modern one. That ended up 114.775. Completely different in feel, and the way that it executed the lap felt not quite as potent as the KTM, not quite as potent as the Brutale. It felt almost like half a class below, but oh, it was nice to use. It was so nice to use. Inline 4-cylinder, plenty of revs, smooth, the action of the engine braking and slipper clutch and everything else into the corners. I mean, it's such a nice, like almost like a 250cc style of like arc and line. I mean, at one point I was convinced absolutely that it was going to go so much faster. I had to check my enthusiasm because I realised I wasn't a second in front of my Ghost, because I didn't set the Ghost. I was a second in front of my fastest time, but I was getting very giddy and very carried away. But Kawasaki, if you want something a bit different, it's quick. Like I say, it's only what, 0.3 of a second down. On the KTM, did 114.775. The Brutale would have gone second with the KTM lap in place. The Z900 would have gone third. MT09, now I've seen quite a lot of people using this and setting good times, so I thought I'd give it a go. Didn't really gel with it, didn't do a lot of laps, if I'm honest. Only did about 4 or 5 laps, and I just, by this point I'd had enough. I've been at it for about 5 hours and I was just like, I'm done. I possibly might go, I always say possibly might go back and have a look at it. I might not, we'll see. But that ended up at 115.2. That would have put us 4th on the leaderboard. And then we tried the Street Triple RS 765. And again, similar concept to the MT09, similar concept to the Brutale, but more closer to the KTM in terms of its lightweight ethos and possibly not being about outright power, more about usability. And we did a 114.7, just chasing that KTM, the lean angle and the way that it stops and turns. There's definitely scope, massive scope for adjustment with the slipper clutch and the engine braking and everything else. It's just going to take time. It's not quite as transparent as Ride 4. 2 clicks on Ride 4 would make the difference between 55th on the leaderboard and 1st. It was absolutely ridiculous, and within 10 minutes of riding a bike I could probably tell you what you needed to change and why and how and what the difference was going to be, and it would do it. It was absolutely mega. This is going to take a bit more time. It's a bit more of a thinker. I hope they put the feedback in for the triggers on the braking and when you're getting the gas and bits and bobs. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they don't try and stop people going quicker, and that's what it feels like. It feels like they're trying to stop people go as fast as they did on Ride 4, because Ride 4 was very, very competitive. And just to say, well, actually, it might transfer across to the sporty stuff. Kawasaki ZX6R636 Race Modified. I put the setting in, I had to muck about with the compression. It was just understeering a little bit, so I just knocked the spring hardness down, I knocked the compression down as well, just to try and get it to sit on the front end a little bit more. A click of spring hardness on the rear because we're running zeros on the nakeds. No, it wasn't perfect. It still felt a bit too understeering for me. It didn't want to turn into the corners. You can see it there, it's fighting itself. So I'm going to do another setup for the sports bikes. I will do another 100 laps trying to work them out. I'll do 600s, I'll do 1000s, I'll do anything I can just to try and get on top of this and try and make people's lives a bit easier, because it's difficult. It's so difficult, and apart from all the fanboys and whatever, it's not an easy game. It's very difficult. There's no feel. The arguments in the comments are absolutely amazing on some posts, especially on sort of like social media when they put a post up and like, can you sort the handling out please? I can't tell what I'm doing on the brakes. It's fine, you leave it. It's the best motorbike game ever made. It's absolute chalk and cheese. There's like no in between. There's no middle. But that would have put us, 113.174 on the 636. That would have put us second. I mean, there's a good 5 tenths, 6, 7 tenths of a second. There's 7 tenths of a second to top spot. But again, a little bit of working it out, and we should be all right. But there you go. That is the fastest setup for the naked bikes that I found. Play with it. If it understeers, play with your spring hardness or your compression damping, or do something, but try and work out where your tyre temp is first. Don't just stop changing everything, because you won't be able to work it out. And if you get stuck, send me a comment and we'll have a look at it. I am pushed for time, I get that. I'm mad busy at work at the minute, but give me a few days and we'll have a look at it and we'll get on and we'll try and do something. Alright, but we'll get there. We will get there, and I'll do a setup for the sportier stuff, and we'll do a setup for race bikes. And I don't think one setup like on Ride 4 is going to work. I don't think you're going to be able to plumb a base setup in and it's going to work for everything. I think there's too much difference between the way the bikes are and where the weight is and everything else. So, but we'll get there. We will get there. Give it a go. Let me know how you get on. If you can see something that I can't and say change this, it's loads better. Stick the setup in the KTM and see how you get on, and smash that time on the leaderboards out of the park. Just use it, abuse it, give it a go, give me some feedback. You've got a setup that you think's better, send it to me, I'll use it, and we'll do a comparison video and we'll use one or the other. But thanks for watching, thanks for commenting, liking, subscribing, and fingers crossed, I'll see you next time. Take care, stay safe, peace.